Bolshego Good News for Armagh. This is the podcast that looks at the big questions of the universe and of our hearts. And today we're actually starting to look at the strands of evidence that God has left for us. The clues to existence, his divine fingerprints upon this universe. C.S. Lewis said that if there was a God, that we should expect to see him in this cosmos. Not like you would find an architect in the wall, but we should expect to find his personality and his presence throughout the building. His point was that we should expect to see clues to his existence in this universe. Not God, because he's not part of this universe, but we should expect to see clues to his existence, his personality throughout the universe. Now, just a little digression before we go any further. I find that this topic that we're going to think about today, it actually goes beyond my expertise. And so I'm going to quote a lot of people. I'll probably butcher a lot of their names, to be honest with you. But they understand the processes much more than I do. I've tried to read the books and I've sought to understand the arguments. And to be honest with you, it has filled me with wonder at the scale and the intricacy of this universe. But also it's filled me with headaches with trying to grasp it. But I am convinced that at whatever level we understand the universe, these arguments can stand. So whether it's a child asking the question of why there is something rather than nothing, or the world-renowned physicist asking why the universe is expanding rather than retreating, we can all come to see the fingerprints of God all around us. God wants us to know he's there. It's not a cosmic game of hotter or colder, and hopefully we will see this as we explore further. So let's start at the start, or actually a little before the start, and ask the question of the child and the physicist of how did we get here? So why is there something rather than nothing? Martin Heidegger, a great German philosopher, said that is the question, the first of all questions. What started everything off? What is the first cause of all causes? Like something is bound to have started the whole process. I mean that it couldn't come from nothing. Like what about cause and effect? We're used to these ideas of events which are caused by earlier events. It's actually the cornerstone of science, and it's actually just part of life. My knee hurts because I went to boot camp this morning and I'm nearly 40, cause and effect. My laptop is on because I hit the button with my finger, cause and effect. Everything we know about this universe is dependent because it has a cause outside of itself. Things fall because of gravity. Elements emerge due to dying stars. You were born because of the actions or decisions of your parents. The tree moves because of wind. So like this universe, which is just a huge pile of such reliant processes, would itself, wouldn't it, need to be dependent on some outside cause other than itself. So imagine a set of dominoes lined up in a row. You hit the first, and the first hits the second, and the second hits the third, and on it goes. It has a first cause, like your finger. Something that starts the domino rolling, so to speak. And it can't be another domino. It must be something other than a domino. Because the domino can't move itself. It needs an outside input. And if this universe has had a beginning, it must have a first cause. An uncaused cause, or an unmoved mover, as Aquinas put it. And the more we think about it, the more we come to see that this argument is both simple for the child and profound to the philosopher. And it's true. The first cause argument, as it is called, is formidable because it is understood by all and makes sense to all by intuition. And this has actually been the case throughout the centuries. It's a very old argument. And from the time of a man called Philoponus of Alexander in the 4th century, to Al-Ghazira in the 11th century, to Bonaventure in the 13th century, to John Locke in the 17th century, to Immanuel Kant in the 18th century, it has grown and developed and has recently been coined the Kalam cosmological argument by William Lane Craig in the 20th century. So, as the brilliant David Berlinski put it, some form of this argument has appeared in every culture. It is universal. Put simply, it is an argument that has lasted because it's easily understood and it's formidable in its logic. So the argument says this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause. I'll say it again. It splits into three. Firstly, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Secondly, the universe had a beginning. Thirdly, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, so has the universe had a beginning? Let's start there for a second. Now, for many centuries, the prevailing thinking of Western society was dominated by Greek influence. And the Greeks taught that the stuff that made up the universe was eternal. And so there was actually no need for a thing as a beginning. But in the last 100 years, this idea of an eternal universe has lost all credibility in the scientific community, as there's been a massive shift in the understanding of our universe. The majority now realise that all the evidence points to our cosmos having an actual starting point. But why the shift in understanding? What has caused such widespread belief that this universe had a beginning? Now, firstly, it was actually the discovery that this universe is expanding. Albert Einstein's breakthrough of the theory of relativity in 1917 was a game changer. It uniquely linked space and time, and it was a revolution in how we think about our universe. Now, following this, Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian priest and physicist in 1927, proved Einstein's math of an expanding universe. And in 1930, he proposed that our universe was expanding. But it actually began as an infinitesimal point, the primeval atom, or the day without a yesterday, as he called it. So Edwin Hubble, on New Year's Day in 1925, published the results of a 2-year study of so-called spiral nebula. And using Henrietta Swan's Leavitt's work from 1912, where she catalogued the stars and their brightness, Hubble proved that certain stars were too distant to be inside the Milky Way, and he actually discovered the Andromeda Galaxy. Then, building on Visto Silfer's work, in 1912 he was able to take those findings and make comparisons, which meant that in 1929 he discovered, by analysing the wavelength of light coming from stars, he noticed that they were shifting red, that they were all moving away from us. Whatever direction he looked, he confirmed what had been predicted, that space itself was stretching out. Now, taking theory and experimentation together, it was clear that our universe was expanding. Secondly, in 1962, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson detected, by means of a hum in their equipment, a signal in the night sky that later turned out to be the remnant of a microwave radiation left over from the origin of the cosmos. Then in the mid-1960s, Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking demonstrated that there was a point, a start to the universe, a singularity as it's been coined. So Stephen Hawking confidently says almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning. So from Einstein to Hubble, we see an expanding universe, and from Penzias to Hawking, we move back to the singularity. That point of a beginning. We are without doubt about this. That's my point. There was a commencement to this universe, a starting point where and when everything began to exist. Now, it is interesting to know that not all scientists were in favour of a starting point of the universe. The name Big Bang was actually coined by an astronomer, Sir Fred Hoyle, who used it actually as a term of derision because he didn't like the idea of a starting point. And as the late Stephen Hawking said in his little book, Brief Answers to Big Questions, many scientists weren't happy with the universe having a beginning because it seemed to imply that physics broke down. One would have to invoke an outside agency, which for convenience one can call God, to determine how the universe began. They advanced theories in which the universe was expanding at the present time but didn't have a beginning. One of these was the steady state theory, proposed by Hermann Bondi, Thomas Gold and Fred Hoyle in 1948. Another attempt to avoid the universe having a beginning was by two Russians. This result was very convenient for Marxist-Leninist dialectical materialism, because it avoided awkward questions about the creation of the universe. It therefore became an article of faith for Soviet scientists. I think that's a really interesting phrase there that Hawking uses. It therefore became an article of faith for Soviet scientists. Notice that their effort is driven by an agenda to keep God out of the issue. The geneticist Richard Lewontin famously remarked in the New York Review of Books, "We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. In spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. I think that is just profound. He is saying that some science is biased because they do not want the divine foot in the door. And David Berlinski, a brilliant man, comically replies, if one is obliged to accept absurdities for fear of a divine foot, imagine what prodigies of effort would be required were the rest of the divine torso found wedged in the door, with some justifiable irritation demanding to be let in. Like, you can see what he's saying, there's bias. And if there is, where else could there be? Now, as we noted in the last session, we all have bias, and the church, not just science, has been guilty of this down through the years too. It can come out on both sides. And so John Lennox, in his book God's Undertaker, says this: it's rather ironic that in the 16th century some people resisted the advances in science because they seemed to threaten belief in God, whereas in the 20th century scientific ideas of beginning have been resisted because they threaten to increase the plausibility of belief in God. I think that's ironic too, and we need to follow the evidence where it leads. So from the early Greek thinking to modern scientific discovery, we see clearly that there is a confirmed beginning. Now, whatever begins to exist has a cause. That is true to life. Therefore, the universe has a cause. But how did it begin? What is this cause that we're thinking about? What was it like 1 second before the initial surge of energy? Something cannot come from nothing, or can it? Well, it actually depends on how you define nothing. So 2 popular books have been released in recent years. Firstly, A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss, and The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking and his co-author. And we need to address these. So firstly then, Lawrence Krauss, in explaining why the universe has a repulsive force, he says this: the answer is nothing. By nothing I do not mean nothing, but rather nothing in this case. The nothingness that we normally call empty space. That is to say, if I take a region of space and get rid of everything within it, dust, gas, people, and every radiation passing through it, namely absolutely everything within the region of the remaining empty space, weighs something. Head scratch. What? Now, earlier in his book, he rails against the philosopher and the theologian defining nothing as non-being. Meaning, like, what he means is what everyone else in the world would mean by nothing. The existence of nothing. But what he actually means by nothing is in fact a quantum vacuum, which is made up of particles. He means that there is actually something there. Now, I'm not doubting his science, he's a brilliant man. But do you see what he's doing? He's redefining nothing. He's saying that nothing is actually containing something. And any sensible person can see that this is just wrong. So Richard Dawkins was on BBC Question Time a while ago defending Lawrence's book, and he said that the universe can come from nothing. To which the reply from the man on the panel beside him was, like, do you mean that nothing is nothing? And to which kind of Richard Dawkins backtracked and said, well, it's not actually nothing. At this point the audience burst out laughing, and you can see why. Because they're trying to redefine nothing to say that nothing actually contains something. And there is the problem. Because all that they are doing is pushing the answer back one and adding another domino. They don't actually answer the question of beginning. They just push it back by saying that nothing is actually something. Now, William Lane Craig, in response to this notion, tells the story of Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey, when he introduces himself to the Cyclopses as no man or nobody. And one night Odysseus puts out the Cyclops' eye, and his fellow Cyclopses hear him shout, nobody's killing me, nobody's killing me. And you see the problem. Nobody is not really nobody. And in science, quantum vacuum is not really nothing. And to start calling these values nothing is at best redefinition and at worst a misleading effort. Maybe someone should tell them that they have not actually answered the question of why there is nothing rather than something. Secondly then, Stephen Hawking and his co-author in The Grand Design. In their conclusion to the book, they write this: because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists and why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue torch paper and to set the universe going. Now, John Lennox wrote a wee book in response to Hawking, called it God and Stephen Hawking, Whose Design Is It Anyway? And he said this, he said, Hawking assumes, therefore, that a law of gravity exists. The main issue for now is that gravity, or a law of gravity, is not nothing, if he is using that word in the classical philosophical correct sense of non-being. If he is not, he should have told us. When physicists talk about nothing, they often appear to mean quantum vacuum, which is manifestly not nothing. In fact, Hawking is surely alluding to this when he writes, we are a product of quantum fluctuations in the very early universe. And so John Lennox is making the point that all that they are doing is putting another domino. Where did this matter come from? Where did this nothing come from? Where did this law of gravity come from? It doesn't answer the question, it just moves it back one position. It adds another domino. This universe that has had a beginning has had a cause. This means that there must be something outside the system or an outside agency that has begun the process. Like Lewis's illustration of the architect at the beginning. The architect's not in the wall, he's outside the building. Now, could this be God? A unique being that exists without a cause, that did not spring out of nothing, who exists beyond time, that is his own cause and the source of everything else. The one who needs no cause in himself. This certainly could be God. Now, what really shocks me is this, is that the kind of being needed both to start and maintain this universe is exactly the person described in the pages of the Bible. So whenever other cultures were thinking about this cosmos, this world, this universe, they thought about God's coming from the matter of the universe, being inside the loop, like the architect in the wall. Or whenever other civilizations were talking about many gods, gods for wind and sun and stars, gods inside the loop. The Bible has for millennia said that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth with all its processes, standing outside it. This one being existed before anything. Before any matter existed, he creates ex nihilo, the theologian says, out of nothing. This is what is needed. Throughout the Bible, God is said to be transcendent, meaning he's outside of time and space, not bound by it, and existing before it. He is uncreated, eternal, powerful, and wise. And you have got to take this on board. How did they get it so right and so exact? Listen, this universe has had a beginning, and there seems to be a cause behind this universe, and the Bible has the answer to it. And so if this is true, this means two things. If God is the first cause to this universe, this means two things. Firstly, this material world is not all that there is. Now, we'll come back to this later, but it's really worth thinking about now. That God stands outside of this universe. Where does he stand? This universe is not all that there is. But secondly, this world has a purpose behind it. And this makes your life significant and valuable. And this makes sense because without sounding arrogant, we know this by intuition. The great stars and quasars out there don't know that we exist, but we know they do. And that for all their power and size, we are of more value than they are. And the only way, to be honest with you, you will start to see this, is to get to know this God behind the universe. And if you don't, you will miss out on life. And you will miss out on knowing your significance in life. For my 30th birthday, my wife did well. And she arranged for us to go fly fishing, something I actually rarely get to do now because, as a lot of you know, life is busy. And so it was a really good treat. And as I was standing beside the water side, I started thinking about fish under the water. At least I think there were fish there. I didn't catch many of them. But I began to think about a trout swimming about. Let's call him Trevor. And he bumps into another fish, but called him Sammy, the salmon. And they start to have a chat. Welcome to my mind. It's not pretty. Trevor says, Sammy, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the water, the darkness, the coldness. I'm just sick of it. And Sammy says, well, what are we to do? That's our lot in life. We're fish. And Trevor says, I can do something. I can go up on land. And Sammy protests and says, Trevor, it won't work. It's best for you to stay down here. And Trevor snaps. He says, I'm away. I want to kick a football. I want to walk in the breeze. And so he goes and he swims over to the water's edge and he flops himself out up on the bank and begins to suffocate and die. And so why does he die? Well, he dies because he was made for the water. That's where he thrived and truly lived. And he took measure into his own fins, so to speak, and lived his own life the way he wanted to, not the way he was designed to do. Like a man driving his sports car off-road is destined to wreck the car, as it wasn't designed for that. What are we designed for? What is our purpose? If this universe has a cause behind it, it means that there is a cause to live for. And the first cause is our first purpose. And if we don't live for him, we destroy the car. We die. And I meet so many people whose bodies are wrecked because of the way they live. They're not living for their first cause, their first purpose. Their lives have no direction and purpose because they have thrown off belief in a creator. And I repeat, if there is a mind behind this universe, then there is a purpose for your life. And that first cause, God, is our first purpose. Why is God relevant in my life? Well, because without him, you're missing out on knowing who you are. You're missing knowing your significance and your purpose in this universe. So argument goes, whatever begins to exist has a cause. We've seen that. The universe has had a beginning. Science tells us that. Therefore, the universe has a cause. God is the most reasonable answer to this. Now listen, if this argument convinces you, that is great. If not, stick with us, because there's more to come. I am a convinced Christian, not because of the one strand of evidence, but because of the many strands. And we'll see in coming talks the amount of evidence that we have for God's existence. Next time we're going to look at the just after the start. But for now, we need to think about Martin Heidegger's question. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the first cause of this universe? Slán go fóill.